that I think I'm gonna add this page in. Y'all remember what the Civil Rights Act dealt with regarding commerce? Oh, it's gonna be bad on Friday. Civil Rights Act bars discrimination in public accommodations engaged in interstate commerce. This one was the one that I think really had some overlap with the federalism chapter, because I had mentioned to you that commerce power was one of the first places the government went in dealing with this. But we went further, and you notice up here, for instance, a hotel that has customers from other states or orders any products from other states cannot refuse to serve customers based on their race. But the other piece was prohibited discrimination in employment on the grounds of race, religion, national origin, or sex. What was significant about the 1964 Civil Rights Act as we transitioned from race a little bit into gender?
Women.
What about women?
It protected women, but it was a joke.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
The clause was thrown in to prevent the Civil Rights Act, but it passed anyway.
Sex was not included in the original Civil Rights Act of 1964. It was actually a Virginia congressman that threw it in, and he amended the bill in order to try and kill it. It was a joke. If we're going to protect the rights of these colored folk, we might as well protect the rights for these women folk too. And in fact, it passed anyway. And when it passed, the joke was on him, because ladies, 55 years ago, y'all didn't get rights because people wanted to give them to you. You got rights because somebody wanted to keep them from coming to somebody else. And that's kind of a double slap, if you will, when you put this into context. I know that we're coming up probably on some film time, but we do still have a few minutes. Looking at some of these videos, articles. Let me get into the articles, because they do overlap with the videos a reasonable amount. I put stop and frisk in there. The stop and frisk one was the one, if you remember, dealing with stopping and frisking of Hispanic and black New Yorkers. Take a good look at that article. And there aren't many articles that I actually ask you for numbers. This one might be a pretty good one. Do you remember any of the numbers that came out of this article? Percentages, numbers, go ahead. Is this Emil or you?
This is me.
Okay, go ahead.
Wasn't one of them 70%
70% said.
70%
Said.
was like, for the amount of times, it was like, I don't remember, never mind, sorry.
Go ahead, Matt.
87% of people stopped for black or Hispanic.
Yeah, I think it's something like 87% of the 4.4 million people that were stopped were either black or Hispanic, and this would have been overwhelmingly black and Hispanic males. And the idea was let me go ahead and pull this up, and we'll just take a look at this, because this was kind of where we transitioned from the federalism chapter into the civil rights chapter. But you'll notice up here, 87% of 4.4 million people. And the key word on this was furtive movements. Do you remember what furtive was? Sketchy. If you looked a little suspicious, if you looked nervous, like you're trying to get ready to be up to something. And this actually could be legal. They did put body cameras on people so that they could watch this now. But the sense was that if you just looked at people and they were black or Hispanic and you went over and you decided to search them, that seems like you're judging the book by its cover, and it's probably a little bit racist. But you notice up here, 90% of them were released without any charges. So a lot of these people were stopped. You could argue that that's good because, hey, the policy's working, or you could argue maybe they didn't have good criteria for stopping them in the first place. I'll leave that to your discretion. Do you remember how many weapons they actually confiscated? Because this is kind of a big deal too. In the 10-year period, go ahead, Matt.
8,000 guns, 80,000 knives.
8,000 guns and 80,000 knives, box cutters, and other assorted weapon kind of things. And I think the number that I had given you in over a 10-year period is that's like saying you pulled one every hour of every day, of every week, of every month, of every year for like 10 years. So when you put this into context, it's a hell of a lot. I throw this out to you, though. You could argue that that's a good thing. You could argue that that's a problem because, they stopped 4.4 million. You take this many weapons off the street, that sounds good, but it's a real small percentage. Do you remember what the argument was as far as why this wasn't racist? Go ahead. Is this Naomi or Emil?
This is me.
Okay.
This is the 70 whatever percent I was talking about, because they said that they were doing this because like the majority of the people that were committing violent crimes or shootings were the people that they were stopping.
Blacks commit 66% of the city's violent crimes and 77% of the shootings. And the logic would be, if this is what the numbers say, where there's smoke, there's fire, this is where you start to look. If you pulled weapons from somebody that was black or Hispanic, who was most likely to be the victim of the crime if you didn't pull? Go ahead, Mohammed. Black or Hispanic. And the thought was, by some, was that if you pull these weapons, it's not a racist policy because you're protecting other black and Hispanic New Yorkers. Of course, the other piece is, my God, if 87% of New York is black or Hispanic, well, that fits right in line with what they're doing. But New York is not 87% black or Hispanic, so the percentage of people being searched was way higher than their percentage in the actual population. Take a good look at this one and make sure that you're comfortable with a lot of these numbers. And like I said, it is still technically legal, but they're looking at body cameras now to see why people are stopping, who they're stopping, and we'll see, what ends up happening with that. Looking at a couple of more of these political correctness articles. We spent a lot of time on this. Don't disappoint me on political correctness. Can you give me any examples of the political correctness stuff that we talked about? This is how we kicked off chapter 5. Go ahead, Elisa.
Is this the one video where there was Tiger Woods and that guy talking and the guy said that boy or something?
Who was that guy?
Fuzzy.
Yeah, we're getting warm on that. Fuzzy Zeller, the older white golfer, when Tiger Woods won the championship, the U.S. Open, yeah. And what was the significance of the U.S. Open when you won the championship?
You got to drink dinner.
You got to pick the dinner the next year. And Fuzzy Zeller, when asked about Tiger, he said 3 or 4 things that you could argue were really offensive, insensitive, racist, however you want to go. What did he say? Okay, kind of give it to me in complete sentences, though.
I hope he doesn't do fried chicken.
You see that little boy? You tell him not to serve fried chicken next year, or collard greens, or whatever the hell them people eat. Yeah, that's what he said. And if you remember, what state was it that was dealing with the fried chicken? What state?
Georgia?
What state was it that actually made the sensitivity pamphlet that was dealing with fried chicken?
North Carolina.
Not, oh my God, no. Why does it always got to be North Carolina? Matt, go ahead.
New York?
Not New York, but you're getting closer. Yes.
Alabama?
It was Delaware. Alabama? Who yelled that out? Delaware. Delaware was the state that actually made the racial sensitivity pamphlet that said you could not ask black coworkers if they wanted to eat fried chicken or watermelon. Fried chicken or watermelon. What they ask about Hispanic folk.
Landscaping.
Oh,
Gardening.
You can't ask your Hispanic coworkers if they can help you with your landscaping. What about to the gay coworkers?
If they need help or something.
Have you thought about getting help for that? No, you can't. You can't ask that according to Delaware Department of Transportation. What about the Asian coworkers?
You didn't know IT guy?
You must be the new IT guy. Yeah, you're not. These are things, if you remember, that you weren't supposed to say. Take a look at that. Now, what other? You remember what Iowa was? Iowa.
Oh.
What was Iowa known for?
Potatoes?
Not potatoes. What was Iowa known for?
Department of Aging?
DOA, Department of Aging. And what is that an acronym for? Dead on arrival. The older Iowans got upset about that. I'm trying to think. Michigan. The roommate. What was she not allowed to put in her ad for a roommate? She wanted a Christian roommate, and Michigan was the one that said that she needed some training so that she didn't do that kind of thing again because that was considered discriminatory. Do you remember about little people? LPs. What did they get upset about? The M word, and the M word is? Yeah, zoom in on them as they say that. Yeah, and in fact, what did they compare the M word to? To the N word. The little people of America, the interest group, said we want the M word banned because we're LP or little people, little person. That's the preferred term. And the M word to us is like the N word to African Americans. And they said, in fact, that there is, a history. We want this thrown to the dustbin of history, just like the N word, because it's so offensive to us. And if you remember, there was kind of a weirdness to that because y'all didn't remember lynchings and things of the little people. It's not the same, so it kind of made their point, but it unmade their point at the same time. Go ahead. Any other articles that you remember?
The NBA dress code.
What about the NBA dress code?
They weren't allowed to wear do-rags.
Do-rags.
Headphones.
Headphones during press conferences.
Beaters.
Wife beater tees, sleeveless tees. Anything else? The important stuff.
I say chains.
Chain. What about chains?
Oh, the weight of like a child, like a baby.
Not allowed to wear gaudy chains with gaudy pendants the approximate size and weight of a small child. Remember, go back and look at the NBA dress code because NBA players, and the NBA, I think in that article, is roughly about 80% black. They said that this dress code was a racist dress code because it targeted the way that modern African Americans, or at least not modern necessarily, but pop culture African Americans dress. They said that this was racist. What ended up happening with this?
It disappeared because companies were going to pay them to wear a certain.
Yeah, some people in the article actually said, hey, if you're going to make us have a dress code, you need to pay for us to buy new clothes. Some people said, hey, you need to ultimately, we need to have more of a decision in this. This is racist and discriminatory. And there were some pretty significant NBA players that said this. But when outside clothing companies came in and said, we're going to pay you to wear our clothes at your press conferences, the controversy really, really went away. What should they have done in setting their dress code that would have made it far less racist? Go ahead.
They should have said that you have to look a certain way when you go to like press conferences, like business professional, business casual.
If they would have told you what to wear,
Yeah.
instead of telling you what not to wear, this would have been a lot easier. And if you remember, I had asked y'all, like, your dress codes at work, and many of you said, well, I got to dress this way, I got to dress this way. You know, maybe sometimes you'd say no open-toed shoes or different things like that. But for our purposes, make sure you're clean with that. Who was the person that represented the NBA dress code before it was passed? Iverson was. And who was the person that represented the NBA dress code after in the videos?
Chris Paul.
Chris Paul. Don't forget about the videos as you go through this. Jim Crow. Can you give me any examples of Jim Crow laws? Separate bathrooms. Go ahead.
Separate water fountains?
Separate water fountains. Go ahead. Separate schools. Go ahead. Separate buses. What about stuff from the article? What were things that they said in there? Because we spent some time on that.
You can't marry the same race.
You can't marry the same race?
You can't marry different races.
That wasn't like Missouri, right? Or something like that. Sorry.
Take a look at the Jim Crow article because we went through about 6 or 7 of these. If you remember the 7-foot partition in restaurants, if you remember, golly, what else? There was the baseball playing on separate lots, a minimum of several blocks away. It wasn't even about playing together. It was playing so that you couldn't see or hear or be tempted. You remember if they shared the night, Negro man and white woman, or white man and Negro woman, they could suffer penalties of up to a year in jail and a fine of $500. These kinds of things. Do you remember the segregated cemeteries, the separate hospital entrances? Make sure you go back and spend